Picture this. You're not in your comfortable home, bathed in the soft glow of a screen. You are somewhere else entirely. The air is thick, stinging your eyes with a cocktail of wood smoke, sweat, unwashed bodies and spilled ale. You're in a Viking longhouse in the year 900 AD. It's your wedding night. But forget everything you think you know about romance, privacy and love. The single, long room is packed with the roaring, laughing and jeering figures of your entire clan, your new family, and what feels like the entire village. There is no escape from their gaze. The fire in the central hearth spits and crackles, casting long, dancing shadows that make the bearded faces around you look like monstrous masks. They are celebrating, yes, but they are also watching, waiting. Because the main event, the true seal on the contract that has just been forged, is about to happen. And you are one of the two star performers. Your bedroom isn't a room at all. It's a small, curtained-off alcove at the end of the hall, a space barely large enough for a wooden bed piled with straw and furs. This flimsy curtain is the only thing separating your most intimate moment from a crowd of 50 drunken, Hermione expectant witnesses. And they aren't going anywhere. What is about to happen in that bed is not a private act of love. It is a public confirmation of a business deal, and your survival in this society depends on it. Before we tear back that curtain and expose the chilling realities of Viking intimacy, if you find yourself fascinated by the raw and untamed truths of our past, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more journeys into the forgotten corners of history. And please comment below and tell me what part of the world you're watching from. It's a powerful thought, isn't it? That we can all gather here, from every corner of the modern globe, connected by a shared curiosity for a world so fundamentally different from our own. A world that we, with our modern sensibilities, would almost certainly not survive. What you're about to hear isn't just a list of strange customs. It's a story about how a brutal landscape and the constant threat of death shaped the most personal aspects of human life. It's about how concepts we hold sacred, privacy, choice, and romantic love, were luxuries the Vikings simply could not afford. The image of the Viking you have in your head, the noble warrior, or the fierce shield maiden, is a romantic fantasy. The reality was far more pragmatic and infinitely more terrifying. Let's start with the very foundation of your marriage. It had almost nothing to do with you or your feelings. You didn't meet your partner at a market, fall in love, and decide to build a life together. It's far more likely you barely knew them. Marriages were contracts negotiated between families with the cold calculus of a corporate merger. Your father, or your brother if your father was dead, made the decision. They weren't looking for a kind heart or a sparkling personality in your future spouse. They were looking for land, for wealth, for a powerful alliance that could mean the difference between prosperity and starvation, between peace and a bloody feud. The groom's family had to pay for you. This wasn't a dowry you brought with you. It was a munda, a bride price, paid directly to your family. You were, in the starkest terms, an asset being transferred from one owner to another. Your value was measured in cattle, in silver, in the strength of your family's name and the strategic advantage they offered. Your consent was not a factor. Your happiness was not part of the equation. Your role was to be the living seal on this brutal, pragmatic pact. The wedding ceremony itself was a public spectacle designed to reinforce this transaction. There was no quiet exchange of vows. It was a day-long affair of feasting and drinking, of boasts and oaths shouted over the noise of the crowd. The key moment was the exchange of gifts. Your new husband would present your father with the agreed-upon bride price. He might also present you with the keys to the longhouse, a symbolic gesture that many today misinterpret as a sign of empowerment. It wasn't. It was a transfer of responsibility. You were now the manager of his household, responsible for the food, the cloth, the servants and the children. It was a heavy burden, not a grant of freedom. In return, your family would give him a sword, a powerful symbol of his new duty to protect you, and the family honour you now represented. Every part of the ceremony was a public declaration of this new ownership, this new alliance. There was nothing subtle or personal about it. It was a raw, public display of power and property changing hands. And now we arrive at the moment the entire village has been waiting for, the bed-warming ritual. As the night deepens and the ale flows faster, a select group of witnesses, Usually close family members of both the bride and groom are chosen. Their task is to escort the new couple to that curtained-off bed. Imagine the sheer psychological horror. You are led through a crowd of leering faces, their drunken jokes and advice following you like a physical force. They pull back the curtain for you, and you are ushered into the cramped, dark space. The witnesses don't just leave. They remain outside the curtain, their shadows flickering against the fabric, their ears straining to hear the sounds that will confirm the marriage has been consummated. This isn't about celebrating your union. It's about verification. It's the final, non-negotiable clause in the contract. The consummation is the proof that the deal is done, that the heir-producing capabilities of the bride are now the legal property of the husband's family. There is no privacy, there is no tenderness, there is only the crushing weight of expectation and the chilling knowledge that your performance is being judged by the very people whose acceptance you need to survive. This single, terrifying ritual strips away every modern notion of intimacy, leaving behind only a cold, hard, and public transaction. The marriage has now been legally sealed in the eyes of the community, but the ordeal is far from over. What happens the morning after, and in the countless nights that follow, is governed by a set of rules and expectations even more alien and unforgiving than the wedding itself. The first grey light of dawn filters through the smoke hole in the roof, a merciless, revealing light that signals the end of your night, but the beginning of your new life. The witnesses, finally satisfied, have stumbled back to their own sleeping benches, their snores now joining the cacophony of the longhouse. For the first time, you are technically alone with your new husband, but the feeling is not one of relief. It's one of exhaustion and profound exposure. As you lie there on the scratchy straw, the furs smelling of animal and damp wool, your husband reaches over. But this is not a tender caress. He presses something hard and cold into your hand. This is the Morgengifu, the morning gift. Modern romantics might see this as a sweet tradition, a token of affection after the first night together. They would be dangerously wrong. The Morgengifu is the final step in the transaction. It is your payment. It is a public acknowledgement from your husband that you were, as expected, a virgin, and that the marriage has been successfully and satisfactorily consummated. It is his public seal of approval on the asset he has just acquired. This gift, perhaps a silver brooch, a set of keys, or even a small farmstead if he is wealthy, is now your sole property. It is the one thing in this world that he cannot take back from you, the one piece of security you have in a life that is otherwise entirely dependent on his whim. It is not a gift of love, it is your severance package, your insurance policy in a world where he could divorce you tomorrow for being barren or simply for being disagreeable. Think about the psychology of that moment. You have just endured the most public, most humiliating night of your life, and your reward is a cold, calculated payment, a confirmation that you have fulfilled your contractual obligation. This is the foundation of your marriage. Not trust, not affection, but a brutal, material pragmatism. Now the curtain is pulled back for good. You must rise, dress, and face the day, and in doing so, you face the crushing reality of your new home. There is no door to close. There is no room to retreat to. The entire longhouse is one single, cavernous space. The central fire pit, which was a roaring bonfire last night, is now a smouldering bed of embers. A couple of thralls, the household slaves, are already moving about, rekindling the flames and preparing the morning meal. The air is even thicker than before. A dense fog of old smoke, stale ale, and the morning breath of 50 people. Look around. The long wooden benches that line the walls are not just for sitting. They are the beds. Families are huddled together under piles of furs, children tangled with parents, cousins with uncles. At the far end near the door, the lowest-ranking members of the household, and even some livestock brought in for warmth, are stirring. The noise is a constant low-level assault. Coughing, snoring, a baby wailing. The low murmur of the first few people waking up. This is your bedroom, your living room, your dining room, and your prison. You will never be alone again. Every argument you have, every moment of sickness, every whispered word will have an audience. The concept of personal space is a fantasy you must forget immediately to survive. Your bed, the one you just left, is likely a lock bed, a closed-off box bed that offers the illusion of privacy. But it's an illusion bought with claustrophobia and stale air. Everyone else simply sleeps on the open benches. Imagine trying to find a moment of intimacy in this environment. It's impossible. Sex from this point forward will not be an act of passion. It will be a furtive, and quiet affair, performed under the constant paranoid fear of being overheard by your mother-in-law sleeping just feet away, or by a curious child, or a resentful slave. It becomes a duty, a biological necessity for producing the heirs that your marriage contract demands. There is no room for exploration, for tenderness, for the slow building of connection that modern relationships are built on. There is only the grim, repetitive task of procreation, squeezed in between the snores and coughs of your extended family. And let's talk about the bed itself. The mattress is a bag of coarse cloth stuffed with hay or straw. The Halmstra. It's a paradise for fleas, lice and other vermin. It's rarely changed and it absorbs every spill, every bodily fluid, every scent. The furs piled on top are heavy and greasy, cured but rarely washed, retaining the smell of the animal they came from and the humans they now cover. This is not a sanctuary of comfort and rest. It is a nest of filth and discomfort where you are expected to be a willing partner, to conceive children, to recover from childbirth, and to endure sickness. The romantic image of a Viking warrior returning to the warm embrace of his wife is shattered by the cold, itchy, and deeply unhygienic reality. Your survival here depends on your ability to shut down your senses, to ignore the lack of privacy, the constant noise, the filth, and the complete absence of personal dignity. You are a public figure in a private play, and the stage is this single, smoky, crowded room for the rest of your life. Now that you are married, paid for and permanently installed in this public fishbowl of a longhouse, you must learn the complex and unwritten laws that govern your body. Your primary function, the very reason for that bride price, is to produce children, specifically male children. An heir is not a blessing, it is a requirement. A barren wife was a catastrophe, not just for the family line, but for the woman herself. Infertility was almost always considered the woman's fault, a sign of a flawed product, a breach of the unwritten contract. If after a reasonable amount of time, perhaps 2 or 3 years, you failed to conceive, your husband had every legal right to divorce you. And divorce in the Viking Age was not a quiet parting of ways, it was a public declaration of your failure. He would call witnesses, 3 to stand at your bed, and 3 to stand at the main door of the longhouse. In front of them, he would declare you divorced, listing your barrenness as the reason. He would then cast you out. You would be sent back to your family in shame, a used and broken piece of property. Your family, who had received the bride price for you, would be dishonoured. You would be a burden on them, your prospects for another marriage virtually zero. You would spend the rest of your life as a dependent, a constant, living reminder of a failed alliance. The psychological pressure to conceive must have been immense, a constant gnawing anxiety that shadowed every single day. Every month that passed without a pregnancy was another tick of a terrifying clock, counting down to your potential ruin. This wasn't about the joy of motherhood. It was a desperate race for survival and social standing. But what if you do conceive? What happens when your body begins to change? The concept of a delicate, resting pregnancy did not exist. You were still the manager of the household. The keys he gave you were not symbolic. You were expected to oversee the thralls, manage the food stores, weave the cloth, prepare the meals, and tend to the animals. The work was relentless and physically demanding. There was no maternity leave. There was no special treatment. Sickness was seen as weakness. You would be expected to carry on with your duties right up until the moment of labour. And when that moment came, it would not be in the sterile, medically supervised environment we know. You would retreat to your flea-infested box bed, or perhaps a special birthing hut, which was often little more than a crude shelter built for the purpose. But you would not be alone. You would be surrounded by the other women of the longhouse. Your mother-in-law, your husband's sisters, his cousins, the very women whose position you might one day threaten with a new heir. Their role was to assist, but it was a role steeped in superstition and folk medicine. There were no doctors, no understanding of germs or modern medical procedures. They would chant, make offerings to the gods, and apply poultices made of herbs and animal dung. A difficult birth was a battle fought with superstition as the only weapon. The mortality rate for both mother and child was astronomically high. childbirth was a terrifying, life-or-death ordeal, and you would face it not with the support of a loving partner holding your hand, but in the company of women who saw you as much a rival as a relative, their help a mixture of genuine aid and grim-faced judgment. And what of the child who is born, if, after all that suffering, the baby emerges, the ordeal is still not over? The child would be placed on the floor, awaiting the father's judgment. Your husband, the man who owned you and this house, would approach and inspect the infant. He was not looking for a family resemblance or counting the toes. He was looking for flaws. He was checking for any sign of deformity, sickness, or weakness. This society, living on the knife's edge of survival, had no room for what they considered unproductive members. A child with a clubfoot, a cleft palate, or any perceived imperfection was a drain on resources they could not afford. If he deemed the child worthy, he would pick it up, claim it as his own, and a naming ceremony would be planned. But if he saw a flaw, if he decided the child was not viable, he would simply turn his back and walk away. This single act was a death sentence. The custom of utbada, or carrying out, meant the unwanted infant would be taken from the longhouse, carried out into the wilderness, and left on a rock or in the forest to die of exposure or be taken by wild animals. You, the mother, who had just endured the agony of childbirth, would have no say in this matter. Your maternal instinct, your love for the child you just brought into the world was irrelevant. You would have to lie there, helpless, and watch as your baby was carried away to its death, all because of a father's cold, pragmatic decision. The emotional devastation of this act is almost impossible for us to comprehend. To survive this, you would have to build a wall inside your soul, a fortress of emotional detachment, simply to keep from going mad. This brutal reality of procreation, from the pressure to conceive to the life or death judgment of your newborn, reveals a world where human life was conditional, and a mother's love was a luxury that could be overruled by the harsh calculus of survival. Let's assume your child has been deemed worthy. The father has lifted the infant from the floor, a silent act of acceptance that sends a wave of relief through your exhausted body. You have succeeded. You have produced a viable heir. Your position in the longhouse is, for the moment, secure. But this security is fragile, and the dynamics of your marriage are about to become even more complicated. The Vikings, for all their brutality, had a surprisingly complex and, in some ways, progressive view of divorce, at least on the surface. But this progressiveness was a double-edged sword, one that could cut you down just as easily as it could free you. You, as a woman, actually had the right to initiate a divorce. This sounds shockingly modern, a testament to the strong shield maiden trope we love so much. But the reality was far more perilous. The grounds on which you could divorce your husband were specific and humiliating for him. The most famous of these was if he struck you. A single slap, a public act of physical abuse, was grounds for you to declare yourself divorced. This was not because the Vikings were against violence. Their entire culture was steeped in it. It was about honour. A man who had to resort to hitting his wife was seen as weak, unable to control his own household through authority and respect alone. It was a public stain on his honour. Another, even more bizarre reason was if he wore clothing deemed effeminate. If your husband, a fearsome Viking warrior, decided to wear a shirt with a neckline so low it revealed his chest hair or nipples, you could legally divorce him. Again, this wasn't about fashion. It was about honour. He was failing to present himself as a proper man, bringing shame upon the family. In these cases, you could call your own witnesses, declare the divorce, and you would be entitled to leave with not only your Morgan Gifu, but also the original bride price your family received. In theory, this was a powerful tool, but theory and practice are two very different things in a world governed by brute force. Imagine the reality of this situation. You are in the longhouse, surrounded by his family, his brothers, his cousins, his father, all of them warriors, all of them fiercely protective of their clan's honour. You stand up and publicly accuse your husband of hitting you or dressing like a woman. You are not just divorcing a man, you are attacking the honour of his entire family. You are publicly shaming them. Do you really believe they would simply let you walk away with their silver and your dowry? The risk of a violent reprisal was enormous. A blood feud could erupt. Your own family might be unwilling to back you up, fearing the consequences of war with a more powerful clan. The legal right to divorce was a loaded gun, and pulling the trigger could easily result in your own death or the death of your kinsman. It was an option of last resort, a desperate gamble for a woman in an unbearable situation, not a simple escape clause. Now let's flip the coin. Your husband's grounds for divorcing you were far simpler and far less dangerous for him. We've already discussed barrenness, but he could also divorce you for being lazy, a vague accusation that could mean anything from failing to manage the thralls effectively to not weaving cloth fast enough. He could divorce you for being argumentative, for challenging his authority in front of others. He could even divorce you for being unfaithful, an accusation that, unlike for him, carried an immediate and brutal social death sentence for you. And for him, the process was clean. He declared the divorce, sent you packing, and his honour was, in most cases, intact. He kept the house, the land, the children. You left with nothing but your mourning gift and your shame. This creates a chilling power dynamic in the bedroom and in the longhouse. You must be constantly vigilant. Every word, every action is being judged. Is this meal prepared well enough? Is the hall clean enough? Am I challenging him too much by voicing my opinion on this matter? Am I smiling enough? The constant threat of being cast out for a subjective failure creates a state of perpetual performance. The intimacy of the marriage bed becomes a minefield. You must be a willing and available partner to produce heirs, but you must not be so forward as to be considered wanton. You must be compliant, but not so passive as to be seen as useless. It is an impossible tightrope walk. And let's not forget the ever-present reality of your husband's other sexual partners. While your infidelity would be a catastrophe, his was often expected. It was common for a Viking chieftain to have concubines, often thralls or women captured on raids. These women would live in the same longhouse as you. You would have to watch every day as he shared his bed with them. They might even bear him children who could potentially rival your own for inheritance and favour. This wasn't seen as a betrayal of your emotional bond, because an emotional bond was never the point of your marriage. It was simply his right as a powerful man. Your survival depended on your ability to accept this, to swallow your jealousy and resentment, and to maintain your role as the chief wife, the manager of the household that included your own rivals. The Viking bedroom was not a private sanctuary. It was a political arena, and you were a player in a ruthless game where the rules were stacked against you, and a single misstep could mean utter ruin. Let's peel back another layer of this romanticised Viking image and talk about something we so fundamentally take for granted: hygiene. We've established the longhouse is crowded, smoky, and filled with unwashed bodies, but let's zoom in on the intimate, physical reality of that. Forget daily showers, running water, or even soap as you would recognise it. Cleanliness was a luxury, and a very different concept from our own. The primary source of water would be a nearby river, stream, or well. Every drop of water for drinking, cooking, and washing had to be hauled by hand, usually by the women or thralls, in the depths of a Scandinavian winter. This meant breaking through ice on a frozen river to access the frigid water below. It was arduous, bone-chilling work. Consequently, water was used sparingly. A full-body wash was a rare event, perhaps reserved for special occasions or the weekly washing day. This day was known as Laugardaga, literally washing day, which has survived in the modern Scandinavian languages as the word for Saturday. On this day, a fire might be built to heat stones, which were then dropped into a wooden tub of water to warm it. The entire household, from the chieftain down to the lowest thrall, would take turns using this same tub of murky, lukewarm water. By the time it was your turn, the water would be a disgusting soup of dirt, grime, and shed skin from a dozen other people. This was their version of Spa Day. While Vikings were considered unusually clean by some of the other European cultures they encountered, who often bathed even less frequently, their standard of hygiene was, by modern standards, appalling. The bed you shared with your husband, with its straw mattress and animal pelt blankets, was a thriving ecosystem for parasites. Fleas and lice were a simple fact of life, an omnipresent annoyance that you would learn to live with. Now consider the implications for intimacy. The air in your curtained-off bed would be thick with the unwashed smells of two human bodies. The furs would be greasy with accumulated sweat and body oils. This was the sensory landscape of Viking romance. There were no perfumes to mask the odours, no mints to freshen the breath. Dental hygiene was rudimentary at best, while their diet, low in sugar, meant they had fewer cavities than modern humans. They suffered from immense wear on their teeth, from the grit in their stone-ground flour. Skeletons show teeth worn down to the stumps, abscesses, and infections that would have caused chronic, agonizing pain and unbelievably bad breath. Kissing, an act we consider central to intimacy, would have been a very different and likely far less pleasant experience. Let's move on to an even more personal topic: menstruation. In a world with no disposable sanitary products, no tampons or pads, how did a woman manage her monthly cycle? The answer is with whatever materials were at hand. She would use scraps of old linen or wool cloth or wads of absorbent moss, which would have to be washed and reused. Imagine the logistics of this in the crowded longhouse. Where do you discreetly wash these blood-soaked rags? In that same river you get your drinking water from. Where do you dry them without putting them on public display for your husband, his brothers, and the entire household to see? It was a monthly exercise in futility and potential humiliation. There were also numerous superstitions surrounding menstruation. A menstruating woman was often considered to be in a state of spiritual impurity or even danger, capable of spoiling food or attracting bad luck. This could lead to periods of forced isolation, making an already uncomfortable time even more lonely and stressful. And then there is the toilet. There was no indoor plumbing. The toilet, or salerni, was typically a small separate outhouse, little more than a shed with a wooden bench over a pit. In the dead of a blizzard, in the middle of the night, you would have to leave the relative warmth of the longhouse, push through a snowdrift, and make your way to this freezing, foul-smelling shed. There was no toilet paper. People used handfuls of moss, leaves, or even discarded scraps of wool, whatever was soft and available. The pit beneath was rarely emptied, creating a permanent, overpowering stench and a breeding ground for disease. Sicknesses like dysentery would have swept through a longhouse with deadly speed, passed from person to person through contaminated food, water, and the general lack of sanitation. Surviving this environment required an immune system of iron and a complete desensitization to filth and smells that would make a modern person physically ill. Think about enduring a pregnancy in these conditions. The nausea of morning sickness compounded by the constant stench of the longhouse. The exhaustion of carrying a child while hauling buckets of icy water. The terror of childbirth in a bed crawling with fleas, with only unwashed hands to assist you. The constant low-level infections, the parasites, the dental pain. This was the baseline state of existence. The strong, healthy Viking you see in movies is a survivor. For every one of them, there were countless others, especially women and children, who were broken and killed by the sheer filth and disease of their daily lives. The Viking bedroom was not just a place of procreation. It was a biological battleground where your greatest enemies were not rival clans but the invisible world of germs, parasites and infection that thrived in the squalor you called home. You have navigated the treacherous waters of marriage, childbirth, and household politics. You have carved out a space for yourself in this brutal world. You have survived. But do not mistake survival for safety. The Viking longhouse is a microcosm of the world outside its walls, a place where power is the only true currency, and violence is its most common expression. The bedroom, that flimsy, curtained-off space, is not a sanctuary from this reality. It is its epicenter. To understand this, you must first look away from your own precarious position and look at the thralls, the slaves who share this hall with you. They are human tools, living property, and their bodies are not their own. The young thrall woman who serves you your food, who stokes the fire, who carries your child. She lives in a state of perpetual, silent terror. At any moment, on any night, your husband, his sons, his brothers, or any free guest he wishes to honour can take her. There is no word for the rape of a thrall, because in their legal and social framework, the act itself did not exist. You cannot steal what you already own. You cannot violate the rights of someone who has no rights. She will be dragged from her sleeping bench, or simply taken where she stands, and used. Her screams, if she dares to make any, will be ignored. Her struggle will be met with casual, overwhelming force. And you, the wife, the mistress of the house, will be forced to witness this. You will see it happen from across the hall, or hear it through the thin walls of your own bed, and you will do nothing. To interfere would be to challenge your husband's property rights, an act of rebellion as unthinkable as telling him he could not slaughter one of his own sheep. You will learn to avert your eyes, to block out the sounds, to see this human being not as a person, but as the rest of your society does, as an object. This is a part of your own survival, a necessary hardening of the soul. This casual brutality creates an atmosphere of constant low-level menace that permeates everything, while you, as a free woman and a wife, are afforded more legal protection. That protection is a thin shield. The line between marital duty and coercion is a line drawn in sand. Your consent is assumed to be a permanent condition of your marriage contract. If you are tired, if you are sick, if you are simply not in the mood, it is of little consequence. To deny your husband could be seen as an act of defiance, a challenge to his authority, grounds for being labelled argumentative and cast out. The threat of divorce, of being sent away in shame, is a powerful weapon of coercion. True, he cannot beat you without risking his honour, but there are other ways to inflict pain. The threat of force, the unspoken promise of violence that hangs in the air of a society built on it, is often enough. The bedroom becomes yet another place of performance, where you must feign willingness to maintain a fragile peace. But this brutal system of sexual politics was not reserved solely for women. It also policed men with a terrifying ferocity, and the ultimate tool of this policing was the concept of ergi. This single word was the most devastating insult that could be levelled at a Viking man. It has no perfect English translation, but it encompasses ideas of unmanliness, effeminacy, cowardice, and, most damningly, sexual receptivity. To accuse a man of ergi was to say he willingly took the passive or female role in a sexual act with another man. This was not a condemnation based on a modern concept of homophobia or religious morality. It was about honour and power. In the Viking worldview, the penetrating, dominant partner in any sexual act was affirming his masculinity and power. But the receptive partner was sacrificing his. He was making himself a woman, and in doing so he was forfeiting his very identity as a man. The consequences for being convincingly labelled with ergi were absolute. You could be declared a nidinga, a social outcast with no honour and no rights. Any man could kill you without fear of legal reprisal or having to pay a fine to your family. Your property could be seized. You were, in effect, a dead man walking. This incredible social pressure created a paranoid obsession with performing masculinity at all times. Men had to be aggressive, boastful, and dominant. Any sign of weakness or perceived effeminacy could be twisted into an accusation of ergi. This terror explains the bizarre law about divorcing a husband for wearing a low-cut shirt. It wasn't about the shirt, it was about nipping any hint of ergi in the bud. The Viking bedroom, for a man, was therefore a stage upon which his honour was constantly at stake. He had to perform his dominance, not just for his own sense of self, but out of a mortal fear of what would happen if he didn't. This is the ultimate hypocrisy of this world. A man could brutally rape a female slave with complete impunity, but to be the receptive partner in a consensual act with another man was a crime punishable by death. It tells you everything you need to know about what this society truly valued. Not morality, not justice, but the raw, brutal, and uncompromising assertion of power. Years bleed into one another, each marked by the turning of the seasons, the harvests, the births, and the deaths. The face that stares back at you from a polished shield is no longer your own. It is a roadmap of survival, etched with the lines of worry, grief, and relentless hardship. Your hair is the colour of ash. Your hands are gnarled into claws by years of weaving, grinding, and hauling. You have outlived your husband, who fell not in a glorious raid on a foreign shore, but from a fever that boiled him from the inside out. You have buried children, some taken by the winter cough, others by the bloody flux. You have survived. But in this world, old age is not a golden reward. It is the final, most grueling test. The glorious Viking ideal, the one whispered in sagas around the fire, is to die with a sword in your hand and earn a seat in Odin's hall, Valhalla. But that is a story for men, and a fantasy for most of them. You are a woman. Your battles were fought in the birthing bed, and in the silent, political warfare of the Longhouse. There is no Valhalla for you. Your afterlife is the dim, shadowy realm of hell, a cold and dreary existence for those who die a straw death, a death of sickness or old age, in a bed of straw. You feel your status shifting like sand under your feet. You are no longer the mistress of the house. Your son, now the chieftain, has taken a new wife, and you watch with a sense of horrifying déjà vu as the entire brutal cycle begins again. You see the fear in the young bride's eyes on her wedding night, the same fear you once felt. You are there as a witness to the bed warming. You see her receive her Morgan Gifu, the cold payment for her virtue. You are now the mother-in-law, the old woman huddled by the fire. A figure of authority, perhaps, but also a figure of the past. Your son's wife now holds the keys to the longhouse. She manages the food stores. She directs the thralls. You have been replaced. You have become a dependent, another mouth to feed. Every bite of food you take is at the sufferance of your son and his new wife. The cruel arithmetic of survival that you lived by your entire life is now being applied to you. Are you still useful? Can you still mend nets, tell stories to the children, offer wisdom, or are you just a burden? It is the ultimate degradation. To be judged by the very system you so desperately upheld. Your body, once strong and capable, betrays you daily. Your joints ache with a fire that never goes out. Your vision blurs, making the intricate work of the loom impossible. You rely on others for the simplest things. The long, cold walk to the outhouse becomes a perilous journey. The crowded, noisy longhouse, once the entire scope of your world, now feels like a cage. You retreat into your memories, but even they offer little comfort, for they are filled with the ghosts of the dead and the echoes of past traumas. You look at the thralls, the descendants of those you once saw brutalized, and for the first time perhaps you see not objects, but fellow sufferers in this great grinding machine of a life. The rigid lines of status begin to blur as you approach the one great equalizer. In your youth, your body was a vessel for heirs, a tool for alliances, a property. In your old age, it becomes your final enemy, failing prison of flesh and bone. When the final sickness comes, it is not a gentle fading. It is a squalid, public affair. You are confined to your bed, the same straw-filled, flea-ridden bed where you gave birth, where you slept beside your husband, where you endured fever and loss. The sounds of the longhouse continue unabated around you. The laughter, the arguments, the crying of a new baby. You are a ghost at your own feast, a dying woman in the middle of a living room. Your family cares for you as best they can, bringing you water and broth, but their help is pragmatic. They are waiting for the end. There is no privacy in death, just as there was no privacy in life. Your final, ragged breaths are drawn in the same smoky air, witnessed by the same faces that have watched your entire life unfold. And then, it is over. The silence from your corner of the hall is noted. Your body is washed one last time, dressed in your finest, though worn clothes. Your most precious possession, the Morgan Gifu you received a lifetime ago, is perhaps placed in your hand or buried with you. You are carried out of the longhouse for the last time. There is no magnificent ship set ablaze on the water. That is for kings and legendary jarls. You are laid in a simple pit, dug into the cold earth, perhaps lined with stones. A small mound is raised over you, a final, anonymous mark on the landscape. And then, life in the longhouse moves on. Your sleeping bench is taken by someone else. Your memory lingers for a time, a story told by your children. But soon it too will fade, absorbed into the endless, brutal cycle of survival. You are forgotten. The story you have just heard is not an anomaly. For thousands of years, for the vast majority of human beings, life was this: a short, brutal, public ordeal, dictated by the harsh necessities of survival. Your world, the one you are sitting in right now, with its privacy, its sanitation, its medicine, its expectation of love and choice, is a tiny, fragile island in the vast ocean of human history. We look back and romanticize these ancient cultures, cherry-picking the sagas and the artifacts that appeal to our modern sensibilities. But we must never forget the silent majority, the countless individuals like the woman in this story, whose lives were consumed by a reality we can barely imagine. Her story is a testament to the unbelievable resilience of the human spirit. But it is also a chilling reminder of how thin the veneer of our own civilization truly is, and how quickly the rules can change. You did not survive the Viking bedroom. You did not survive because you were never there, and in that simple fact lies a privilege so immense, so profound, that it is almost impossible to grasp.